Welcome, everyone. Just going to give one more minute for additional attendees to join us, but thanks for being here. Well, good afternoon and good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining this COSIN webinar. My name is Reg Lichty. I'm the co-founder of Foresight Law and Policy. We are a Washington, D.C. based education law firm. We're privileged to work very closely with COSIN on the organization's policy. And we're thrilled today to be part of the rollout of this year's, or I'm sorry, I should say last year's report on state and federal cybersecurity developments in education. Very excited that the paper is being posted to the COSIN website today among the organization's other cybersecurity resources. I will kind of walk you through the highlights of the report today. We will not go through every detail. I'll leave that for your later reading, but hopefully by the end of the call today, you'll have a sense of some of the major developments, especially at the state level in this space. We'll have some chance for discussion at the end. And I also just want to talk a little bit about how we think the paper can best be used, because it contains, as you'll find out, a lot of information, just given the breadth of work that policymakers undertook in this space this year. Before I dive in, I just want to acknowledge my colleague, Ani Johnson, who throughout 2023 closely monitored the 50 state legislatures for cybersecurity bills that would impact school districts, and reporting that, and her role in developing this paper. She was unfortunately not able to be with me today, so I just wanted to acknowledge all the work that she put into developing this excellent product with the COSIN team. I will, stop from time to time to take a look at the chat to take questions from you. We'll have time at the end, as I mentioned, for questions, but feel free to post any questions you have as I kind of move through the presentation as well. And I'll try to, keep one eye on the chat so that we can answer those as we go along as well. Just want to give you a sense of the agenda for today's webinar. I'm going to start just with a quick kind of view of the big picture, top line stats around state and federal developments in this space. We're going to then transition to a conversation about new state cybersecurity laws that actually have a specific K-12 focus. We'll highlight 3 of those. There are more, as you'll find out, that were signed by governors across the country. Just for the sake of time, I'm going to highlight just 3 of them today. We'll then talk a little bit about some of the new laws that were passed that were not education specific, but have implications for school districts, and in some instances, post-secondary institutions. And those bills are typically measures that target the cyber readiness of state and local government generally, inclusive of school systems. So we'll highlight a couple of those examples as well, and you'll find a lot more information about those laws, including kind of descriptions by state in the report. From there, we're going to transition away from the laws that were signed to also take a look at the legislation that was introduced So, our thinking is not every great idea makes its way to the governor's desk for her or his signature. So we also want to understand as a community what types of legislation were kind of introduced, what were some of the major themes of the bills that were out there. And we'll try to draw out some of those themes and trends, organized by those that are focused on K-12, those focused on post-secondary institutions, and also those kind of general government bills that capture our education system as well. After walking through the state landscape, I'm going to talk a little bit about COSIN's cybersecurity policy recommendations. These are ideas that COSIN developed as an association using both, its internal experts. So there are kind of experts in the field that COSIN relies on to lead its cybersecurity work that develop other resources. We'll highlight some of those at the end of this presentation, but based on their work and then based on some of the trends we're seeing across the country, we've developed a handful of policy ideas for state and local leaders to consider. And then we're going to wrap up with a kind of a shorter look at some of the federal legislation that was introduced in 2023, as well as some of the executive branch activity that we want you to know about. And then we'll have a little bit of time at the end of the session for group discussion. So let's start with the big picture. Nationally, there were 307 cybersecurity bills introduced that have kind of, again, implications for education. About 75 of those measures actually made their way through the process to become laws. So, that's a significant number for a single legislative cycle. At the federal level, it was, I won't say quiet, but it was less of a focus kind of relative to state leaders. But there were 22 cybersecurity bills with education implications, again, that were introduced in the first session of the 108th Congress. 5 of those, were kind of focused on K-12. We'll talk a little bit more again about those at the end. And then I want to highlight a couple of important executive branch developments that happened in 2023 that we'll talk a little bit more about at the end. Of course, the FCC's recent proposal to create a $200 million school and library cybersecurity pilot initiative. We'll talk about that notice of proposed rulemaking. And then also talk a little bit about the guidance that CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, published at the beginning of 2023. So you might say, 307 bills, 75 laws, that seems like a lot. You can kind of see from the chart that was a pretty significant increase in activity relative to 2020, 2021, and 2022. Those are the years that COSIN has been tracking this policy issue and for which the organization has developed past reports. Especially the number of bills really has increased substantially. And so we just want to, kind of be reminded that this is a very, important topic, front of mind for a lot of state leaders. I think the number of bills, I think that's about a 250% increase relative to 2020 and about a 620% increase in the number of laws adopted. So, it was a very busy legislative period in 2023 that produced, a number of ideas that I think are worthy of kind of further examination by the community. So let's start, as I said, with a look at the new state laws that actually focus on K-12 education, right? Because since a K-12 focused entity, first is, as you look kind of across the entire spectrum of new laws that were adopted, states were largely focused on proving policies that focused across government and not just K-12 schools. But 9 states did adopt cybersecurity laws that targeted K-12 education specifically. Thematically, those measures touched kind of a range of issues, including things like requiring school districts to either update or create for the first time cybersecurity policies. Um, you know, Focusing on improving statewide coordination of cyber defense, right? So these are the information and strategy sharing that are part of cybersecurity systems kind of nationally. Simple things like creating a task force in one state to examine the relationship of the emergence of artificial intelligence and cybersecurity, providing information to parents and other themes. None of these ideas will, surprise you. I think they're consistent with the cybersecurity strategies we've seen in the past, but kind of an increase here with 9 states actually passing new laws addressing these areas. And I would say these, laws were not adopted in kind of one type of state or one kind of geographic region. They really represent both a geographically and a politically diverse group of states where these 9 laws were passed: Arkansas, California, Illinois, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, New Mexico, North Dakota, and Texas. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these states today, but I would just encourage you to download the report today and take a look at, all of these states. We've captured at least a baseline bit of information that'll give you a sense of the direction that each of these states decided to take. I'm just going to highlight 3 of them, though, right, just to not spend our entire time just on this segment. The first I wanted to identify for you is California AB 1023. I think this one is in particular important because of the value of ensuring that school districts are part of an information sharing ecosystem that helps them not only prepare for a good cyber defense, but also to take part in information sharing that might help them recover from a cyber attack. So in California's case, the state decided to expressly add the California Department of Education to the state's existing cybersecurity integration center, the CalCISIC. And then there was also kind of this new recommendation or new requirement that school districts be among the entities which the integration center coordinates information sharing, including proactively sharing information about current cyber threats. I included a little bit of information here about the kind of history of the Cybersecurity Information Center as well. This was an entity started by the governor in 2015 by executive order. State later codified it. This is the kind of next step in the evolution of the center to really place a greater emphasis on, sweeping California school districts into the system in an affirmative way. In Minnesota, the state adopted a law that would make, cybersecurity expenditures, right, including the costs for kind of updating computer hardware and software, cyber insurance, which is increasingly, a challenge for districts to secure because of costs and underwriting requirements. So making all of those costs an eligible use of Minnesota's Safe Schools revenue. So I think an acknowledgement by legislators about just how serious this threat is. Of course, there were major attacks in the Minneapolis metro area, but other examples around the state that legislators kind of realized had to be addressed. And I think, it's a clear signal to districts to take this problem seriously and provide them some financial support to help address the significant costs of cyber defense. This third state I want to highlight among the 9 laws that were adopted that focus on K-12 is the Texas HB 18. This Texas law directs the state board to adopt standards around, the permissible electronic devices and software that schools can use. And in adopting those standards, really calling on the state to, address cybersecurity. Some language here that also requires school districts to ensure that parents have some understanding of this threat and the steps that they can take. And then, taking the simple but powerful step of ensuring that a party, like a parent, but also an employee in a school district, has a person to take a cybersecurity concern to. That is, what is the chain of command? How do we raise alarms or questions about school district cybersecurity? And then there's another provision in HB 18 as well about, when states are transferring equipment to students, districts are called on by Texas to adopt security and other rules that kind of govern that transfer. That requirement, includes a specific call out to promote and partner with parents in cybersecurity and online safety. So again, those are just 3 examples of the state laws that were adopted that specifically focus on K-12 schools. I'd encourage you to dive a little bit deeper on each of those, but also, take a look at the other 6 states that, we just don't have time to go through all of them today. I would point out, Jill's pointing out in the chat that, a link to the report will be mailed out if you need assistance in finding it. So keep a lookout in your inbox for that. So, as I mentioned up front, not every state chose to kind of follow the K-12 focused path in adopting new laws in this area in 2023. So I want to talk for a minute about, the over 60 new laws that were adopted that, while not specific to K-12 or post-secondary, have implications for our school districts. Thinking about some of the kind of common topics of those new state laws, kind of general capacity building across state and local systems. Very big focus on trying to build out the workforce that's required to provide the kind of human element of cybersecurity. We'll talk more about that. Things like governance. I mentioned in the Texas law, for example, the simple, requirement that a district have a designated leader for these issues. I think we see steps taking stronger actions to provide systematic kind of cybersecurity governance at the state level, to establish that leadership and chain of command in a logical and strategic way. Information sharing, we talked about the California bill, but there are also information strategies across government agencies generally. Things like prohibited apps. These are, we've seen some of these kind of controversial state laws banning apps like TikTok, citing cybersecurity and other issues, notice and response requirements, policy and planning, and other things, just to give you a sense of the broader array of state laws that were adopted in 2023. But I want to highlight a couple of them. One is Maryland SB 801. In this case, this is, again, one of the kind of workforce-focused bills that I mentioned. Of course, it's very difficult for school districts to hire the experts that they need to bolster their cyber defenses. As a competition for people that have this skill set. That includes, right, often higher salaries in the private sector. So, growing the overall size of the workforce to ensure that our cybersecurity needs are met across sectors, and in our case, especially for school districts, we see states taking these strategies to try to incent and support people into the profession. In this case, Maryland has established the Cyber Maryland program to increase the cyber workforce. They talk about, building an advanced cybersecurity workforce. So, right, not only growing the size of it, but, a sort of well-equipped workforce. That is also informing kind of training and education programs for the public and others. So I think a big focus here in both of these areas is very valuable. Maryland also included kind of a diversity element here with it's the Cyber Warrior Diversity Program as part of SB 801. And there are other examples, right? You saw on the chart, right? Number of nearly 15 of these kind of workforce laws across the country, and they take somewhat different forms from state to state. I also wanted to highlight North Carolina HB 259. This is an amendment to North Carolina's cybersecurity reporting law. Requests that districts, like local districts, local jurisdictions, including school districts, state agencies, or other critical infrastructure partners, when they're seeking state assistance, right? There was a requirement here around notifying the North Carolina Emergency Management 24-hour watch, right? So that these things can be inventoried and then activated in a systematic way. They also took the step in North Carolina of, reopening the state's cybersecurity pilot program. Once it's to try to explore additional offerings that weren't part of the original pilot, but also to select additional vendors to be part of it. So you can see here, right, this is kind of an information sharing strategy. It's also a governance strategy, but also, kind of breach notification strategy as well. So a lot, I think, wrapped up in this approach that North Carolina is taking. So I mentioned up front, obviously we are, very focused on the laws that were passed in 2023 in this space, but there are good ideas, of course, that were introduced in state legislatures across the country that, we also want to take a look at. So I want to spend a few minutes just examining some of the legislation that was introduced that was K-12 specific, and just kind of quickly identify a few of the themes we saw in those bills. Again, this is the bucket of legislation, a bucket of policy that didn't make its way to the governor's desk. We saw kind of big themes around required school district planning and policy development to ensure that school districts are being thoughtful about their cybersecurity strategies. So, bills in Michigan and Arkansas and Minnesota and Texas. Again, workforce expansion, Utah, North Dakota, and Minnesota. Some kind of direct technical assistance to school districts, and in one case at least required kind of curriculum. Again, you can see some geographic diversity here in New York and New Jersey, but also Georgia and Maryland. Cyber infrastructure funding, right? This is around kind of technology and less the human element of the cyber security. Bills in Iowa and Minnesota, Nebraska, and Texas. You'll see as you read the report more about each of these themes, but just wanted to give you a sense of some of the major topic areas that legislators were featuring in their bills. Again, COSIN focused on school districts, but we want to highlight that legislatures are also in some instances developing legislation targeting post-secondary education. Some of these bills right? It's maybe directing the post-secondary institution to do something that has a benefit, ideally, for school districts. One of these, of course, is around trying to build the cybersecurity workforce. You can see this very kind of significant number of states that introduced where a legislator introduced legislation around building the workforce in that state. Again, very geographically and politically diverse. Post-sec bills focused on higher education institutions, cybersecurity infrastructure in a number of states. And then in a smaller number, but I think still thematically notable, a lot of legislation on the post-sec side focused on ensuring institutions are prepared for cyber attacks, but also kind of, in some instances, defining, what their governance has to be. Again, ensuring that there's leadership and chain of command around this specific need. So I'm going to take a minute and look at the chat. Make sure there are not questions. Feel free again to kind of post them as I go along. Lastly, just in terms of the legislation at the thematic level, number of bills that were not either specifically focused on higher ed or K-12, but across government, state and local government generally. I mentioned, right, there's this kind of popular movement against specific apps in 2023, often citing cybersecurity as the reason to prohibit those apps on, perhaps state equipment, like, cell phones or other kind of mobile devices. Certainly they were not citing only the cybersecurity risk, right? We saw other kinds of concerns wrapped up in these prohibitions, but I did want to note, right, this was a common theme among a handful of states. Just making direct appropriations for cybersecurity members. So we saw a lot of bills that would kind of fund different types of cybersecurity initiatives, both on the technology, but also on the personnel side. But also investing in things, right? Proposing to invest in things like cybersecurity insurance, with premiums rising, and again, underwriting obligations rising. I think there's a recognition by some state legislators that funding would be needed to help districts and other government entities at the state and local level really kind of manage their exposure to these attacks. Lastly, again, right, you're going to keep saying this, cybersecurity governance and workforce development. Easy things like establishing committees, requiring the, hiring chief information security officers, creating programs for cybersecurity education, right? How do we make sure that, right, in the instance of school districts, that our staff, that our students understand cyber risk and the steps that they can take as users to promote cybersecurity. So, all of these kind of three areas were prevalent across the, several hundred bills that were introduced in 2023 that really didn't make their way all the way through the process. So given everything we talked about, the laws that were passed, the legislation that was introduced, plus kind of connecting back to COSIN's other cybersecurity recommendations, we want to highlight for you today some of the cybersecurity policy ideas that the organization feels are valuable, right? This is not to say that all of these ideas are of particular value to every jurisdiction in the country, I think, but I think they represent a range of areas that are part of a comprehensive approach to cybersecurity that are valuable. You'll see in the report a table that identifies these ideas along with some very high level policy kind of recommendations, but then we've also kind of aligned it to some of the new state laws in that were adopted by states in 2023 with the idea to say, here's an issue area you should be thinking about. Here's maybe a policy idea that could be used to address that area. And then here is an example of a new state law that you could look at to help further your thinking. That is not to say that these state examples are a perfect fit for every jurisdiction, but hopefully they provide some food for thought that lead to the development of a customized kind of policy approach in a given state that, meets the specific needs of that jurisdiction. And I would say, as a general rule, that's how we see the paper, right? It doesn't go into a great level of detail in every area, but we hope it provides nuggets for state and local leaders to really be thoughtful about and lead a kind of planning process around bolstering their cybersecurity in a thoughtful way from the kind of policy perspective. So, first of these, right, that you'll see in the paper and in the table I mentioned, training. This is a focus on both school district employees, but also all users, right? A good cyber defense has an educated user base. This is maybe professional development for teachers, but also maybe some defined opportunities for student and even parent learning around the use of devices in a safe and secure way. I mentioned insurance, right, and risk sharing. Part of this is providing additional funding to help school districts acquire cybersecurity. It might be more sophisticated approaches like creating statewide mechanisms to pool risk, to help, even secure these policies, right? Sometimes it's not even just about cost, but also spreading the risk across a bigger pool of users. Information sharing, right? Again, thinking back to the California law and other examples, making sure that school districts in every jurisdiction are part of statewide efforts to coordinate information sharing. This also, right, is work that's being done through the federal government and certain non-governmental organizations at a regional and national level. So, statewide information sharing is vital, but we also have to be connected to other ecosystems across the country. Governance, again, adopting statewide structures for overseeing and coordinating cybersecurity among state agencies, boards, commissions, and other entities, obviously inclusive of school districts. Without clear leadership, there can't be a comprehensive strategy. Replacing outdated tech, right? So we know that older technology, older software can be particularly vulnerable to attack. That means, right, we need strategies for regularly updating technology, but also the funding required to acquire it. I won't go into it again. We talked about the workforce strategy, making sure there are more people available for these positions in school districts. We want to highlight dedicated funding because investments across state and local government are valuable and not to be looked down upon, but they may not be big enough to ensure that every school district in a particular state has funding for cybersecurity. So we think it's vitally important that there should be some dedicated funding for school districts in this space. And then lastly, right, we've seen this huge emergence of AI in the kind of public discourse and on public use over the last year. That's only going to grow exponentially moving forward. I think, want to be thoughtful through policy about what the implications of AI are for student data privacy and cybersecurity generally. So, excuse me, you'll see more of all of these, more about each of these topics in the paper, again, with some effort to try to align them to some of the state laws that were passed in 2023, again, so that you have examples of what this legislative language could look like or what it might look like in the context of a board policy rule. That might be a state board of ed, it might be a school district board, but we're thinking about policy holistically from the kind of local to state to federal level here. And I'm going to just check the chat, make sure I'm not overlooking any questions. Let's see any. So I want to move on now for the last part of the presentation to a discussion about federal landscape. We won't spend as much time here, but there are a few things that we want you to be aware of, and there's again kind of more information in the paper about these federal bills. I would say at the top line, members of Congress, did take kind of a number of different approaches to this policy area. As they were thinking about cyber defense, I think as state leaders did the same, they were really thinking kind of across the system in a helpful way. So for the first session of the 118th Congress, which was 2023, there were 22 cybersecurity bills that we, identified as having some kind of direct or indirect application to schools. Turns out that's exactly the same number we saw in 2022 at the end of the 117th Congress, and slightly more than 2021, and significantly more, compared to 2020 when we first started to look at this policy space. Just in terms of topics, big focus, obviously, on bolstering the cyber security of school districts, improving the kind of cybersecurity competencies of the technology workforce and education, and including really looking at the critical infrastructure roles that, specialized post-secondary education programs can play in producing a stable and strong workforce in this space. COSIN, for its part, just to go a little farther in this area, has endorsed bipartisan legislation originally sponsored by Congresswoman Doris Matsui of California with some Republican partners in the House. This year, that bill was also introduced in the Senate by Senator Blackburn and Senator Warner. The measure would do everything from setting up a new grant program, cybersecurity grant program for school districts at the Department of Homeland Security's Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA. It would also require, again, kind of consistent with some of the things we've seen at the state level around information sharing nationally, and I think some other very helpful steps. That bill has not kind of made its way through the committee process, but it's one that we'll continue as an organization to champion in 2024. And thank you, Jill, for linking to COSIN's policy page in the chat if anybody wants to learn a little bit more about that bill. I also want to flag that there are a couple really important cybersecurity developments in the executive branch you should know about. The Federal Communications Commission this fall announced and then approved kind of on a bipartisan vote of the entire commission to propose a 3-year school and library cybersecurity pilot program that would spend up to $200 million over a 3-year period. COSIN and its partners, CETA and other organizations, have been very actively asking the FCC to modernize the E-rate program, to invest in cybersecurity. That started with a petition for rulemaking back in 2020. The organization and its partners filed comments in a firewall proceeding last year, right, to say that the E-rate's definition of firewall should be modernized. And then most recently, the FCC said, we think this pilot would be a great idea, a way to collect data about the costs and challenges that school districts and libraries are facing. The comment period is, first comment deadline is at the end of January. The reply comments will be 30 days later. We'll be weighing in favorably in this proceeding. It has 3 goals, right? improving the security and protection of E-rate funded broadband networks and data, measuring the costs. Again, I said it's a kind of a study, right? Measuring the costs associated with cybersecurity and advanced firewall. And then third, and I've kind of underlined this, evaluating how to leverage other federal K-12 cybersecurity tools and resources. So the FCC said all along, as COSIN and its partners advocated for this investment, there are other agencies with expertise in this space that should be brought to bear on this problem, that the FCC can't do all of it. So that's kind of reflected in this third goal of the FCC. Again, this is still in the rulemaking phase, but it had the support of all 5 FCC commissioners. So after going through notice and comment, we do think this will be adopted at some point in 2024. But I want to mention, this third goal again, about other agencies, because I want to highlight that the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency published guidance at the beginning. So this has now been 12 months ago, at the beginning of 2023, for school districts, that is designed to, equip them with resources to help them bolster their cybersecurity. I'm only highlighting a little bit of it here, kind of 3 buckets of recommendations, including investing in the most impactful security measures and building toward what they call a mature cybersecurity plan, recognizing and actively addressing resource constraints, and 3, focusing on collaboration and information sharing. 1, I want you to know about this, but 2, I want you to know that the FCC in this pilot notice of proposed rulemaking references, leveraging other agencies, but it also specifically asks if applicants for this pilot program should be obligated to demonstrate that they are addressing the priorities that CISA has laid out for school districts, right? So there's a direct connection between the cybersecurity pilot proposed by the FCC and these priorities and other recommendations that were published by CISA last year. I think that's great. I think we see in the FCC rulemaking references to the work of the Department of Education and other agencies as well. Certainly has to be a multi-pronged effort, but and really kind of pleased to see this coordination. But organizationally, we really strongly favor running this pilot at the FCC and then using it to inform modernization of the E-rate later, so that there is a steady stream of dedicated resources flowing into school districts for this challenge. So, noted kind of in the earlier part of the presentation about the state laws and bills that were introduced, right? This focus on ensuring that there's a stable, dedicated source of support, even if it doesn't cover everything, can be really one important piece of the puzzle to helping school districts develop a comprehensive plan. Of course, we don't want to see the core focus of E-rate, which is connectivity, disrupted, but there has historically, at least over the last 4 or 5 years, been a significant gap between the amount of funding available for E-rate and the amount that was actually outlaid. So we do think organizationally there's room here to invest in both cybersecurity and broadband in a thoughtful and appropriate way. Lastly, before I just provide an opportunity for questions, I do want to highlight that you can find other COSIN cybersecurity resources on the COSIN website. I have included a link at the bottom of this slide to the cybersecurity resources page. You'll find this list of cybersecurity, tools on that page, but you'll also find kind of the names and contact information for some of the content experts that support COSIN cybersecurity work. So with that, I will open up the floor to any questions you have. I'm going to open up the chat. So please, if you have any questions about anything I've covered or other kind of topics related to K-12 cybersecurity, please let me know. All right. Well, if there aren't any questions, I would just encourage. So Alex, yeah, thanks, Alex, for your combination of the presentation. We appreciate you joining us. Appreciate everybody taking time to be part of the conversation today. Please download the report. Please don't hesitate to follow up with me or the COSIN team if you have questions after reading it. And then I would also lastly just urge you to take a look at these other resources that COSIN has developed to help school districts in this space. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.